Apple is ramping up its legal battle with the government over unlocking the iPhone belonging to one of the San Bernardino terrorists. The company has tapped renowned attorney Ted Olson. He is one of the country's most successful trial and Supreme Court lawyers. Olson is also the former Solicitor General of the United States. He's with us from Washington. Good morning.
Good morning, Charlie.
So here, everybody's talking about security versus privacy here. Security is the argument of the FBI. Privacy is the argument of Apple. But people are now suggesting strongly that you can make this a one-time case. And you heard it on the program this morning. Make it a one-time case. Apple would do it in the privacy of their own lab. You're not offering a master key to all iPhone phones.
That's a totally bogus argument, and the government knows it, and their surrogates know it. There's nothing to stop this government or another government from doing the same thing tomorrow or the next day or next week. In fact, in answer to you, Charlie, I think it was last week, the district attorney of New York said that he had 175 phones, that he was anxious to try this same technique to get into those phones, to require Apple to redesign its product, to break down its security, to abuse the trust of its tens of millions of people who have invested their faith and trust in Apple. The government is going to do this again and again, and the argument that this, just do it once, just violate your principles this one time, you'll never hear from us again, it is totally bogus.
Why are you calling it violating your principles? I mean, Apple has been cooperating with law enforcement for years. In fact, the case that law enforcement is making today, including by John Miller and the NYPD chief William Bratton today, is that until 17 months ago, Apple had been cooperating with law enforcement, giving the key essentially to solve cases, the master key on drug, kidnapping, murder, and terrorism charges, and that there were no documented instances of this getting into the hands of hackers. So what has changed? Why is Apple making this new position?
Apple has cooperated in the past, and Apple has cooperated in connection with this case. What has happened here is that the government is not asking for the key to the cell phone. The government is asking for Apple to design a new cell phone, use new code to break down security systems that are built into this particular iPhone to protect its security and protect the trust of tens of millions of its customers. It wants a different iPhone. It wants it disabled, a defective product, so that the government can get into it. So it is asking Apple that the government conscript its engineers to design a different, flawed product so it can get into this phone, and there's no stopping this government, state governments, foreign governments from using the same technique to get into cell phones over and over again throughout the world. It'll break the system that Apple carefully designed to protect the trust of its customers.
Why is that? I mean, because you think that every case now will be forcing Apple to open up their iPhone? And
sure,
are you saying that if somebody in China says, look, we have an issue here, the Chinese government says we have an issue here, that will force Apple to do the same thing for their phone that it did for the phone involved in the terrorist case?
Well, sure, Charlie. You asked that question of the district attorney in New York, and he said, I'm just anxious to use the technique again and again for 175 phones. What's to stop the U.S. attorney in Milwaukee or the district attorney in Chicago from doing the same thing? And if Apple submits by designing a defective phone, after it spent so much of its resources to develop a secure phone that would protect the privacy of its customers, then that will happen again and again.
Ted, with that legal argument, are you suggesting that every iPhone that's not on the iOS 8 operating system is a defective phone?
No, no, no. I'm saying that absolutely not. That the phone is very effective, and it protects the security and trust and privacy of the people that own those phones and entrust that information. The government is trying to change that design. They're saying go in and redesign the phone so that we can get into it and make it an unsecure phone.
But we insist they say one time only.
They say one time only, but are they saying that we won't go in tomorrow? They're in the New York Times article, by Bratton and Miller today in the New York Times. They say, well, this is not just one case. They cite an example in New Orleans where they say the same technique would be used.
Yeah. But Ted,
Yeah.
let's think about the human life here for a second. John Miller raised a really interesting point on this program last week. He says Apple's trying to protect its customers. What about the victims in San Bernardino in Paris who died with iPhones in their pockets? They're your customers too. Don't they have a right to live? And if Apple has the opportunity to provide information that could prevent terrorist attacks, don't they have an obligation to those people as well?
We have a constitution and we have civil liberties in this country. Terrorists want to take that away from us by attacking the safety of American citizens. Apple is very sensitive to the concerns of terrorism. So am I. It is very, very, very important. But the civil liberties that are written into our Constitution are what the terrorists want to take away from us. Privacy,
a citizen,
liberty, and safety are very important to all of our citizens. And if the government comes to you and say, well, compromise your principles, compromise the constitutional stance that you're taking just for this one case, or for the next case, or for the next case, the terrorists have succeeded. So it is very, very important that we root out terrorism and protect ourselves, but it's very important that we not forfeit our fundamental rights in doing so.
Ted, you have seen tragedy in your own life from terrorism. You know that if, in fact, information is in a phone that most American citizens that had to do with some kind of attack against America, most American citizens would like the government, the FBI, to have access to that information. And that's where it comes down to, not civil liberties, but the capacity of the U.S. government to thwart a terrorist attack.
The capacity of the United States government legally and constitutionally to thwart terrorism attacks. I was in the Justice Department at 9/11 when that tragedy took place. We talked at great length that time. We must fight terrorism, and we must do everything we possibly can to use techniques to listen in on terrorists and find out what they're up to. But we must not violate that line that is our constitutional principles, because if we do, we are not America anymore, and the terrorists have succeeded. We must do everything we can, but we must obey the law. We must obey the Constitution. We must be faithful to our principles.
Okay. Ted Olson, great to have you here this morning. Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.